Hey, John, how are you?
Very good.
Here we are again.
Yeah.
Hey, John, welcome back to the show, man.
Thank you.
Thanks for being
Thank you
here
for.
again. Last
Yeah.
time we had you on, we were talking about a lot of crazy stuff. We decided to use that as a members episode, so thank you very much for that. I know
Awesome.
we were talking about your encounter with some spheres. You've written several books. You're an author. You've been in the military. Thank you for your service. And you have a very different outlook about, aliens in relation to religion, so to speak.
Yeah,
But
Cryptid.
encrypted, yeah. So we know we left off at a moment where you wanted to get into some deeper stuff. So that's why we're back, and we appreciate you being here.
Yeah. So, shoot, I don't even remember. Like, what was the
You were
to
you were
We
going to
left
talk.
off. We left off at the story where your friend was relieving himself.
Oh, the Bigfoot encounter. All
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Uh, yeah. So that was a friend of mine. Uh, his name was Monty, and I knew him back in high school, and he used to live in Arkansas, and he was invited to go on a camping trip, a one night camping trip where they were going to be camping slash hunting. And it was in an area that they were familiar with, but they, I don't know if they ever spent the night there or not, or else they might have encountered this thing. Um, but they were hunting deer, and he had this buck in his sights, his friend, and he shot this buck. It was really nice sized buck. Had a good rack of antlers on there, and it was on a on another what do you call it? On another hill, right? Uh, so they were afraid that if they all went together to the clearing where they saw the buck on the other hill, the brush was so thick over there that the others might not find it. So the guy who shot it agreed to stay back and keep an eye on the buck, looking through his scope, and that he would guide them over to it. So they went down into the ravine and over to the other hill, and they were like shouting back and forth, and he was guiding them to it. And right as they were like getting right up on this thing, the buck, something stepped into the field of view of the scope, uh, grabbed the buck's antlers by with one hand and just flopped it over its shoulder. So this buck was really big. Um, he estimated, this thing was probably 500 to 700 something pounds, and this thing flopped it over its shoulder like it was nothing. And it was really big and extremely muscular, and it's just hairy, gorilla-looking thing with legs that were like too long. Um, but it was very brief, and he was shocked that his friends did not see it. He was screaming at him because he thought, "Get out of there! Get out of there!" Um, he couldn't understand how they didn't see it because they were. He said they were like only 10 feet away from this thing, um, and somehow it grabbed that buck, flopped it over its shoulder, and stepped out of the clearing. It disappeared without making any noise. And when they came into the clearing a few seconds later and were looking around like, "Where's it at?" And he was screaming and yelling and screaming and yelling, and they came back, and he told them, uh, "You did not see this thing just took our buck." And now, of course, they had a hard time believing it, how something could grab an animal that big and just disappear right in front of them and not see it. Uh, but they, okay, this is a Bigfoot. And so they got this idea that, hey, they're going to hunt this Bigfoot, going to have you know, a hunting expedition unlike any ever before, and all these grandiose ideas of, yeah, we're going to be the first people to expose Bigfoot, and we're going to bag a Bigfoot and get our deer back while we're at it. So they broke into two teams of two, because there was four of them, and they were hunting all around looking for this thing, and they kept hearing footsteps. They would have these horrible skunk-like scent come and go. They felt like they were being followed. They were watched the whole time. And when one group was feeling it, the other group wasn't. And then when the other group was feeling it and being stalked, literally stalked by this thing, they would walk and then do things like, okay, on the count of 3, stop and don't make a sound, because I hear this thing walking right behind us. And they would be like, 1, 2, 3. They would stop, and then they would hear 1 or 2 more steps. And it was like right there. And it was dense brush, but not so dense that you couldn't see something that's 10 feet tall. And they're like looking around, and they're like, how in the world is this thing right here? I mean, I could even smell it stink. And they're like almost shot each other a couple of times, so paranoid, running around looking for this thing, trying to shoot it. But they never got a clear shot. And so they finally gave up trying to get it, and they went back to the camp. When they got back to the camp, where they had all their food in a net and hoisted up into a tree, but something had climbed the tree, and they saw claw marks all over the tree. And the net was slashed open, and all their food was on the ground. And cans of beans were ripped open, like something had grabbed the can and just tore it in half and drank it like a soda. And they were like, good grief, this thing, whatever it is extremely strong to take a can of beans and just rip it in half like this. They were really scared. And of course, they were dropped off, and one of their dads was going to come back and get them the next day. So they had no communication. This predates cell phones. So don't even know if they would have got a cell phone signal anyway, because they were out in the middle of nowhere. So they made this big fire, and they decided to take shifts throughout the night so that there would always be one person awake and armed in case it came back. And during the middle of the night, and I guess this is where I left off, the one guy had to go to the bathroom really bad, the number 2. And so he didn't want to crap right there next to the fire. That's not cool. But he didn't want to get too far away, so he went just a little ways away and went over to a tree, and he had his weapon all loaded and ready to go just to pull the trigger, and thought, this thing is pretty sneaky, but I doubt it's so quick that I couldn't grab my weapon and shoot it. So he leaned his rifle against a tree and dropped his pants. And right as he was in the middle of dropping a deuce at the most vulnerable point, that's when suddenly this thing is almost like stepped through a portal or something. He said he had no idea how this thing was suddenly standing in front of him. Like it came from nowhere, like materialized or something, just like took one step, and now it's standing right in front of him, this thing that's like 10 feet tall. And it was so close. I mean, it could have just swatted his head off. He had no time to react. And he was terrified and like wanting to grab the rifle. Probably his eyes were shifting around like, should I do it? Should I do it? Before he could reach over to grab it, the thing quickly reached down and grabbed the rifle, snatched it up, and then it snapped the rifle in half like a twig and threw both pieces of the rifle down on the ground. Like, I know what you were doing. You literally had the audacity to hunt me in my own backyard. You're coming here, you're staying in my woods, you're shooting my game and taking it. And then you stick around through the night thinking I'm not going to do anything about it, Like it was pissed, and it let its intentions, let him know it understood what that rifle was all about by those actions. and really pissed him off. But the cool thing is, it didn't kill him. It just like I checkmate, right? Stand down. And then it just took like a step or two and disappeared into the darkness. And it was just gone, silent, gone. And they were all mystified about how this thing, so big and so heavy, maybe 1,000 pounds, who knows how big, I mean, how much weight that thing was, but how it could just walk around and not make a lot of noise. Or the noise would be intermittent. Like they could hear the footsteps, but then they look around and not see anything, and was just bizarre. And they stayed awake the rest of the night. It never came back. The guy, after he cleaned himself up, he woke everybody up, and they stayed. They all were awake the rest of the night. Nobody could sleep. And they were very happy to be able to get out of there in one piece, because they thought that at any moment this thing could just appear and take their weapons or kill them if it wanted to. And they said adios to that buck. But I thought that the account was genuine, and I really, since my friend was back in high school when he told me this, I took an extra effort to track him down, and he was still living in the area where I lived, in the same city, and I did manage to find him, and I brought that story up, and I asked him, like, okay, dude, full disclosure, I get it if you're just looking for some story to make up or whatever. Do you actually verify that all of that, as I wrote down, because I wrote the account and then I emailed it to him, do you verify, again, reaffirm that this really happened? And he said, yes, this definitely happened. And you can definitely, at least use my first name to reference it. He didn't really want to be mentioned first and last name in my book, but he did give me official permission to cover the story. And then he verified all the facts that I pointed out. And so that was my buddy and his story, and it kind of confirmed to me some things that I suspected about Bigfoot as being a transdimensional cryptid, probably a Nephilim, a version of Nephilim, like some kind of large primate, like a gorilla, crossed with this otherworldly angelic being with a glorified flesh that probably has the ability to shapeshift. Either that, or these entities were scientists, and they could make chimeras, or whatever you call it, through genetically tweaking in a laboratory type environment. I think both scenarios are plausible, because I see angels as technologically advanced beings with this huge scope of how much they rely on technology and how much they don't. Just like Star Trek, right? You have the Q. Do they need a spaceship? Might you find one on a spaceship? Probably. I mean, Q would always pop up and pester Picard and drive him nuts, and then teleport him off to another planet in another dimension and screw with his head, and he'd make himself immune to the effects of the vacuum of space and whatnot, and he could change his size and all of these things. He was extremely powerful. He didn't need technology, but most other species did. And there's a wide variation. Some were extremely powerful, and their technology was getting to the point that it was like, I don't know, magical. Star Wars kind of got into that too, because only the Jedi Knight in the original concept, only a Jedi Knight had the ability to use a lightsaber. They broke that rule with these later versions of the movie, that anybody could just grab that lightsaber and turn it on and use it. But apparently, according to the original concept, only a Jedi Knight with the Force, that thing would only work in their hand. And I think that there's technology out there like that. What I've read about these alien craft is that some of them are like integrated with the neural interface. So they don't have traditional controls and stuff. They just sit there and like maybe put their hand on a pad or something, and they fly this thing and they navigate with their consciousness, and they, single point of consciousness, pop in, one point of the universe, go to another point of the universe in a blink of an eye, instantly. So that's the kind of technology you're talking about with some of these beings, and then, there's all this variation in between. And so you have beings that have technology, and then they also have supernatural abilities. And I think the Bigfoot are like a species that have these supernatural abilities because they were either, created intentionally, or just, these angelic beings coming here and just doing whatever they wanted, that maybe they thought it was fun or something, but they did whatever with them enough that there's a whole species of these things. They're all over the world. The Bigfoot is so prevalent, that they obviously had fun with creating all these different variations of Bigfoot, from the ones that live in the swamps to the ones that live in the Himalayas and in our mountains, and they're just everywhere. Different types of these hominid creatures that are really intelligent and have supernatural abilities. So that's that particular story, so that I could conclude it. But I have lots of other stories about cryptids, and I can't remember whether I told you guys about the cryptids I learned about in Thailand, or the cryptids I know about in El Salvador. But there's cryptids that I know about in those two places that I done scanning on the internet, and that they're not particularly common. So which one would you be curious to hear about most?
I think the Philippines would be probably pretty interesting.
Okay.
They're not. I mean, they're pretty wooded. They're pretty densely wooded too, as far as I understand it. So.
Yeah, my dad actually did Marine training, survival training in the Philippines, and he said they taught him how to hunt out there. So they give them just a little bag of rice and be like, 2 weeks. So you have to do something with this rice to survive, unless you're just going to be hungry as hell. And so, they had a survival expert join them that was like in that area, and then he would like show them how to make traps and things like that. And my dad said he actually managed to catch a monkey and kill it. And he was eating, they cut off the forearm with the hand, and he's like, it's like you're taking a bite out of this forearm and looking at this hand, and it's so human-like. He said there was nothing more creepier than that, but he was too damn hungry to argue with it. So yeah, he ate a monkey and wasn't too happy about doing that. But so the Thailand story, for me, it was interesting because it was something that I kind of got to confirm in a roundabout way. So this dates back to high school as well. I had a friend from Thailand, and we were buddies in high school. And this was before right after I joined the Army, and I was about ready to depart. So I was 17 at the time, and I told my buddy Ha was his name. I said, we should go camping, and he was like, "You're crazy, nobody goes in the. You could go into the woods and stay overnight. You'll get killed." And I'm like, "What in the world do you mean? I mean, yeah, we have bears, but I've been camping out here forever." And he's like, "Bears? No, that's nothing. I mean, there's things out there that will kill you." And I'm like what? And then he said the name of it, but there's this creature that almost killed his brother, he said, in the jungle of Thailand, when they went out, and they were out too late. And that's why he didn't want to be out in the woods at night, because he thought that maybe one of these things would show up. And he said that they were common where he lived, that it was this creature that stood maybe 6 feet tall or so, give or take a few inches, so they could be pretty tall. They had the head of something that looked kind of like a horse. The eyes would look to the side, and it was this really long kind of head. And these long gangly arms and humanoid body, big ass claws, and partway down the legs would become semi-transparent. And so it was like not really here. And these things would just sort of phase in and you would see them. And then they could just sort of phase out, become transparent completely, and then just like disappear. And you would see them like sort of floating around in the jungles. And he said they were, for the most part, neutral, that if you were respectful and quiet, they would leave you alone. That you could literally sort of stand there. If you saw it, just be quiet and you could observe it. And for the most part, they would just sort of ignore you and just keep going wherever they were going and sort of phase out. So when you went out into the jungles in Thailand, you had to be very quiet. You just didn't want to make any noise. And I'm like, well, that's certainly not the case here in the United States. As people go camping, they make a lot of noise. A lot of people usually get a bunch of alcohol and babbling and everything. And he said, yeah, you would never, ever do that in Thailand. And people don't go camping in Thailand. And, I'm getting him, he's saying these hard facts that I'm as if they're like everybody in Thailand knows this, and I'm like, kind of, yeah, I don't know. The BS meter's kind of racking up there a little bit. But he told me that, his brother was out in the jungle a little bit late, heading back toward the house. And it got kind of late on him. And he apparently pissed one of these things off because he was making too much noise, and it started chasing him. And it almost caught him. But he managed to get into the light and get to the house before it killed him. But it slashed on him and cut him up, and he had big slash marks all over his back because it ripped through his windbreaker and tore through his clothes with these big ass claws that it had. So I'm like, okay, I thought you said it was semi-transparent. He said when they get mad, they become completely physical. And they will attack you and kill you. And people get killed there in Thailand by these creatures. So I kind of cataloged that, and it was in the back of my head of just, hey, if I ever meet anybody from Thailand, I have to ask them this. And so same goes for you guys on this show. I mean, if you ever get somebody from Thailand, you might want to ask them this to get even more verification. So years later, after high school, after the Army, I was a substitute janitor. And late one night, I'm there cleaning the classroom, and this one other lady comes in, and she was one of the other sub janitors. And I noticed she was Asian. So I just strike up a conversation with her, and I ask her where she's from, and she mentioned Thailand. And that's when I remembered my buddy, Ha. And I'm like, oh, yeah, you know what? This is going to sound weird, but I got a question for you. I said, so you come from Thailand. I had a friend in high school, and I just wanted to know if he was pulling my leg, saying some kind of goofy, superstitious thing about some creature in the jungle with a head that looks like a horse, and the body is, humanoid. And, I described it, and she's like, oh, yeah, those are common. We all know that. It's only you and the people in the United States, you think these things don't exist. I mean, she's like, we think it's funny that people in the United States think that these things don't exist because they're just, anybody who wants to know could just go to the jungle and see it for themselves. And they're just matter-of-factly talking about it, and knew what this specific creature was. And she said, but that creature is by far not the most deadly creature in the jungle. And I'm like, what could be worse than a horse-headed, half humanoid creature with giant claws that will slash you to death? just because you make a little noise. And she said, she described it, it sounded like an elemental, although it could be a demon. Don't know. And I'm kind of going back to my Dungeons and Dragons days, and I had the whole plethora of deities and demigods and the monster manuals and all of that. And I had all these different types of creatures memorized. And I remember the elementals are supposed to be like this natural, creatures that are part of nature. So it's possible that elementals could be natural creations from God, although the descriptions of some of them don't really match, or especially the behavior. Like if they just have this natural bent to do evil things, then I would be more inclined to think they're demons. But if they're more or less neutral, like an animal, then who knows? Maybe they're this whole other type of creature that God created, not just animals here in this dimension, but there are other animals that are all over. And it really blurs this distinction between cryptids being hybrid angel animal and then just other creatures that God created that also might have supernatural abilities. They might. And I speculate that even some of creatures that are here, even natural animals, might have supernatural abilities to some extent. And I've experienced, I have stories to actually kind of point in that direction somewhat. But this creature was incredibly powerful that she described. She said that that there's a creature known, they had a name for it, but it would be this big black blob, and it's like an amoeba. It absorbs light. So even if it's out in the daytime, it's just pitch black. It changes shape. It just sort of moves around. Like imagine an amoeba about 6 to 8 feet tall. That's this blob, and it just sort of oozes around. And when this thing comes near a person, you start to feel sleepy. And if it gets too close to you, you'll just fall over dead. It absorbs energy from the atmosphere to such an extent that it just kills things by getting near them. And she said that there was this one road that a friend of hers warned her about that road and said that there is one of those things in the jungle because the road kind of goes around this piece of the jungle. This is really deep part of the jungle and nobody goes in there. And that on one occasion when they were going around that area that they were feeling really sleepy and they almost didn't get through it. It was a group of them in the car together. And they were all like on the verge of passing out and they barely made it. They floored it and managed to get through it. And they knew that one of those things had to be near there because they were all passing out at the same time. And so she was warned about this road. And then the friend, she was going to go visit this friend and had to go on this road where she was warned about. Well, on the way there, with her and her brother, the car was starting to have problems. So I don't know if that thing was causing issues with the car too, but her brother started passing out. She, though, the lady that was telling me the story, was not passing out. She had some kind of immunity for some strange reason, and she didn't know why. But her brother was passing out, and the car conked out. And she was panicking because the car died right where her friend warned her if your brother starts passing out or you start feeling sleepy as you're going through this spot, gun it, get through there as fast as you can. But it'll probably never happen because that only happened to me one time and, I live here and blah, blah, blah. So, but unfortunately it happened. And on top of her brother passing out, her car died. And so she got out of the car and figured she knew where her friend's house was, the general direction. And so she kind of rolled the dice and decided to cut through the jungle, break off the road and cut through the jungle to try to get to the friend's house quicker. And her brother was sort of stumbling along, barely conscious, and she was trying to help him, hold him up, and they were going. And she kind of felt, she saw that thing. She actually saw it in the jungle, this big black blob. And when she saw it, she was like, thought for sure they were dead. And so they were scrambling through there, and she saw a little cabin out in this jungle, which is kind of weird. But it was a structure out there. And so she thought, better than nothing. Maybe I'll, if I hide out in here, this thing will just pass by. And she went to the cabin and got inside. And her brother was completely passed out by this time, and she kept shaking him, trying to wake him up, because they said, if you pass out, you might not wake up. Your heart will just end up stopping. And but then the door to the cabin opened, and this thing actually oozed in to the cabin. So she said she managed to start a fire as soon as she threw her brother on the couch. That she rushed over, and there was some wood there and a fireplace. So she started a fire, thinking maybe that would make the thing not want to go in there. Being that fire's this universally, things generally don't like fire. This thing oozed over to the fire, grabbed a couple of logs and threw them on the fire, and then sat on top of the fire. And it blocked all the light out. It just like completely absorbed all the light. And she was terrified, and it was close to the door, so she didn't want to try to go past it to get out of there. And it kind of had them pinned down, sitting on top of the fire. And she said it sat there for like a half hour, just absorbing the heat, energy, or whatever. And eventually it came out of the fire, and it oozed back over the door, went out the door, and left. After it left, and a little bit of time went by, she finally got her brother out of there and managed to make it over to that house where her friend was at. And her brother finally came out of it and woke up again. So I thought that story was pretty crazy. I didn't hit her with like 1,000 questions about, who built the cabin? Why would anybody build a cabin out there? Do these creatures, are they territorial? Do they hang out in the same place, or do they move around, or what the heck? But she certainly seemed to me that she wasn't trying to pull my leg. And the story, she was just, I was pretty surprised to hear that not only had she seen the horse-headed creature, but she'd also seen this black blob, and that those are things that are known to exist in the jungle of Thailand. Regarding the person that I know who was born and raised in Panama, or not Panama, but El Salvador. He said that when he was a kid, his grandmother lived on the edge of this part of the jungle that the kids would go down and play in, and there were these caves down in there. And they would find ancient Indian artifacts and stuff in there from time to time. And so this place was like right near what used to be an ancient civilization. And there was this thing that would come up out of the jungle from time to time. And this thing was known throughout. And I actually did find the name of this cryptid. They have different names for it, but it is similar to a succubus. It is a human female, and it seduces men. But the bottom half of it, as the legs go down, they turn into chicken legs and have these really big chicken feet. Like you get 3-pronged toe. And there is a creature that's one of the variations of this creature. They said that the top part of the body would be a human female and the bottom part would have different variations. But this thing had a way of like hypnotizing men to where they would just like be in a trance, and it could just come up to them and like grab them or, do whatever. Any guy who encountered one would never be the same. It would make them insane. Like just totally scramble your brains. You'd never be the same again. So it had some kind of psychosis effect on people. And this buddy of mine's uncle, he went out to the outhouse. And when he came back out to the house, this thing was out there on the back porch. And he started to feel kind of spacey. But then he snapped out of it and ran toward the door, and it slashed at him and cut his cheek. And then he managed to get into the house. And this buddy's mother also saw it. And I know this friend's mom. Met her and talked to her many times. She's in her 70s now. But she went out to the outhouse. And this thing would like come out from the jungle and like wander around the community there on the near the houses on the outskirts of that jungly area where the kids would go down where those caves and stuff were. And they suspected maybe it was some sort of goddess or something that the Indians worshipped at one time or something. But his mother went to the outhouse, and when she was going back to the house, the thing was standing right there next to the door. They're known more to target men, though. So it was just staring at her, like maybe trying to get a reaction. And she just like stone cold, like, I'm just going to ignore that this thing is there. Walked right past it, went in the house. It didn't do anything. So that's a pretty good self-control that she had. But they called that the chicken foot lady.
So I was married to a succubus, and my first wife, I believe she was a succubus. Honestly, I do. She didn't have
you
chicken
think she
legs,
was?
But yeah, she pretty much stole my soul. And then no, but I've heard of that before. We've heard of the succubus. There's an episode of what's the show with Cartman and those guys? South Park. There's an episode of South Park about the succubus, and she's an evil demon that transforms herself into a beautiful woman who attracts a certain man for a certain reason and takes his soul. I mean, who knows?
Yeah, that's a real thing. Most of the other,
it's a common lore that you
that.
hear from multiple cultures. It is known, in Latin America, but I think it's just like all over the world. That one in particular is a well-known cryptid. They also have something called La Duenda in El Salvador, and they knew a woman who lived in their neighborhood who had been driven insane by this thing. So its description matches that of a leprechaun. It's this little dude, about this tall. And they are wretched, vile little creatures. It's a humanoid, but she said one of the things it would do is crap in its hand and throw the crap at this lady. And it would crap in her food. It had supernatural ability, like it would like just appear, disappear. And it would torment her. It wouldn't let her sleep. And it was driving her insane. It wouldn't leave her alone. She couldn't get rid of it. So the traditional legend of the leprechaun describes more or less a creature that's not nice at all. To call them pranksters, euphemistic, because they, were known to torment people. They like to play pranks, but really evil. I mean, just not good. The pot of gold part, not so much, It's just these creatures were there and they would piss people off and torment them. And then that's another creature that they have in El Salvador. This friend also encountered a demon dog or a hellhound. He had an uncle who was into Satanism. He went to a satanic congregation. Actually, they would do chants and stuff. He had a spell book and all of this crap. And it didn't set well with his mom, who was Catholic. And I don't know, he was just attracted to the power. This friend had abilities. There were times where people said, wait a minute, how could he have been at your house when we saw him over here at this other place at the same time? He had the ability to astral project, but make himself look like he was physically in more than one place. So you couldn't tell if he was physically there or not. He would look like he is. And I met this guy, and me and my friend kind of wondered, when we met him. It was at a family gathering, and he was there. We were like wondering, is he really there? Sort of creepy. Like, why would somebody want to sell their soul for just, to be able to do things like that? It just mystifies me. But my friend he took my friend to his church once. And it was my friend and a friend of his. So 2 kids. And when they went into the church, there was this big pentagram thing on the wall, and they were all chanting and, bowing to this pentagram and whatnot. And being kids, they started laughing because they thought it was ridiculous. Maybe that the nature of the chanting or something had some silly element about it. They started laughing, and the uncle immediately grabbed him and yanked him out of there and told him, you don't want to laugh at these people. They do bad things to people that piss them off. So on one occasion, when my friend was at the supermarket, stayed out too late and was going back to the house, and it got dark in this jungle out there. And of course, this was during the war as well. They had curfews. People got shot when they were out past curfew in El Salvador during the conflict. So my friend was like really worried and upset, like, crap, how did it get so late on me? And suddenly this big ass wolf hound looking dog, pitch black, comes out of the jungle, and its eyes were glowing red. So this was not the effect of car headlights shining in the eyes of an animal at night and the eyes glow, because there was nothing out there to shine light in the eyes of this animal, and its eyes were emitting red glowing light. This thing walked right up next to my friend as my friend was walking, and my friend was like panicking, but figured if it wanted to kill me, it'll just kill me. And my best bet to survive this is to not be scared. So he just kept walking. The thing came right up next to him and walked alongside him and accompanied him all the way home. And then once he got to the house, it parted and went back into the jungle. And when he told me that, I kind of wondered if that was maybe some kind of demon protector, as twisted as that might seem. But maybe the uncle had some kind of spell he casted or whatever. Not the kind of protection I'd want. But fortunately, my friend, managed to get through that. And, that was just another one of his stories about El Salvador and the supernatural things that happened there. Incidentally, that friend of mine, his dad, it was also a story in their family that his dad committed suicide. So he never knew his dad. And his dad's spirit would come back from time to time. And the mother talked about this, saying that right after the dad committed suicide, they had his body in the bed in the house still, and the family had gathered there. And one of the uncles, real slime ball apparently, went into the bedroom where his body was and figured he was going to pilfer a watch off of his body. The door slammed shut, and they heard that uncle getting the crap beat out of him, screaming, begging for help, yelling my friend's dad's name. Finally, they got the door open and he got out of there, and he got the crap beat out of him by his dad. His spirit came back and beat the crap out of him for stealing the watch, and he confessed to it. He's like, here's the watch, take it, I'm sorry. And then for about 2 decades after that, my friend's mother came to the United States, married another guy, and periodically they would wake up in the morning and the dude would be sitting there on the bed, and like a physical person staring at him. And when they wake up, they'd see him sitting on the bed. He wouldn't talk. He'd just sit there staring at him. And of course, her new husband would, crap his jeans, scooting up against the wall, make him leave, make him leave. And and then he would just disappear. And they didn't know why he would do this, but he appeared several times to them over the years, just to, got my eye on you. So pretty interesting stories there from El Salvador.
Well, John, why don't you tell us about your books that you've written? Let's talk about those real quick.
Yeah. So my latest book is Christian Ufology, and I wrote that book because it's a second edition to Aliens and the Antichrist, which I wrote almost like 20 years ago almost. I wrote it in 2005, so it was 19 years ago. And that book was where I was focusing on reconciling my faith, my Christian faith, because I used to be like super into the paranormal and did ghost hunting and all of this stuff where I get a lot of my stories from. And then I had an encounter with Jesus where he audibly spoke in my ear after I woke up from a dream. And I asked who that was. And I heard him say his name. And that completely wiped my slate clean. And then I was like, okay, I still have all this knowledge in my head. Can't erase it, but I now have a new foundation in which to understand everything going forward. But it's going to be an unusual perspective that I have, because I have this encyclopedia of the paranormal in my head, and then I'm reading the Bible, and it turns out I'm reading all of these paranormal things in the Bible. Granted, I believe the Bible for what it says, and I'm taking the Bible as my foundation. God is who he said he is. Jesus died on the cross for my sins. I mean, all of that standard Christian doctrine, that's me. I accept that. And I'm not coming up with anything that kind of messes with that, like, oh, aliens created humanity. Nope, Bible doesn't say that. God created humanity from the dust of the earth. Genesis 2:7, straightforward. But the Bible does have a lot of areas where there's like this gray stuff, gray area where, when were angels created? Bible doesn't directly tell you. The Bible actually tells you too that angels crossed with humans and created giants that were genetically different, had 6 fingers, 6 toes. That, other books like the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jasher, talked about how these beings mated with animals, created what we know of as cryptids. And, concerning so many other things, about the paranormal, I'm open that everything isn't as clear cut as what people think and what a lot of Christians say. And it kind of surprises me that Christians make assumptions like when you die, you either go to hell or you go to heaven, and they can't even tell you what hell and heaven are. When you actually research the words in Hebrew and Aramaic, and, and Greek, you learn a lot of different things that, discover that people make assumptions about a lot of stuff. The fact that, like, angels, for example, that God created each angel individually, a hand created being, instead of the angels reproducing after their own kind like every other species in existence. Why would angels be different? Biologically speaking, that doesn't make sense. And that's where my mind is at. Like, I'm trying to reconcile, okay, let's understand angels and what they really are, where they came from, their origin, how they can reproduce, why they would want to reproduce. That was one of the first questions I had, like, why would these sons of God, the B'nai Elohim, want to reproduce with women? Why would women even be attracted to them if sex were something that was so foreign to them? It would be like me being attracted to a rock. It's just not there, right? There has to be some former experience with this. And that's where I came up with this, that angels are like us. They started out as Adam and Eve, that they reproduced after their own kind, and then they're a transgenic species. They translated like a butterfly going through a metamorphosis, and they translated into this higher form with supernatural abilities. And they no longer reproduce after this transformation takes place. That's how you explain that they don't have sex anymore, is because they went through this metamorphosis, and it changes their function and the way they live, the way they operate. And it's profound. The change is profound, like a caterpillar to a butterfly, practically a different species, but still the same species. And that's what I think humans are. And that's what the Bible describes us as being, that we will go through a translation. We will be like the angels. Luke 20:36, Jesus said it, that we will become purely, completely immortal. And it will be impossible to kill us when we go through this translation. And things like eating will even be optional. We won't even need to be able to do that. Or, you'll be able to, but you won't need to. And that's where angels come from. And so all of this way of thinking, so completely different than Christians who were raised in this environment, or the culture, the Christian culture, and then they hear all these things and they just simply assume it because they're learning about the Bible from other people, and then they read it here and there as they go, and then they never question things when they come across it. They just make assumptions. For me, though, I had a completely different foundation. So when I came to the Bible for the first time, I was like completely like, wait a second, all these assumptions I'm hearing. Another one, angels aren't physical. Well, what's physical? When you get down into the quantum, trying to explain what's physical and what's not becomes a very bizarre thing. That which is physical is a mysterious thing that we don't even understand in our science now. The multidimensional nature of the universe and all of those things. So I had seen all these things early on when I started reading the Bible right off the bat, and that's where my books came from in terms of just the overall inspiration. and I connected the dots with ETs and angels, and then there's other terms, the host of heaven. Those aren't necessarily angels. So an angel is a title. It's not a species. An angel is the highest order of being that applies to beings that were created with that transgenic ability, that they metamorphose into this highest level of being. That's what an angel is, and they're translated into that highest form. But there's other beings that maybe don't have that. And the Bible describes the host of heaven. That's life in outer space, that term. Actually, it's used 18 times in the Bible, the host of heaven. Host meaning vast number of life forms, and heaven, Shamayim, the abode of the sun and the moon and the stars. It's a plural word, heavens. So life in outer space is a term that's actually used 18 times in the Bible. And I wrote that back in 2005. And of course, the earlier book was in 2000, Aliens in the Bible, and that covers a bunch of paranormal stuff, ghosts and cryptids, Bigfoot. I talk about Bigfoot in that book, and all these different things. And then it was in 2000 during the middle of the pandemic. I wasn't really paying attention. The news was talking about COVID and whatnot, wear your mask, blah, blah, blah. Oh, by the way, the Navy's released footage, of extraterrestrial craft called UAPs. And then they showed the footage briefly. It was like a 30-second blip. And they're like, and we don't know what it is. And then Marco Rubio's talking, and he's like, I hope it's from China. I hope it's from Russia. Or no, the opposite. He actually said, I hope it's from ETs, because if it's from China, we're in big trouble. And this is the significance of this 30-second clip that they showed was like, holy cow. Since 1948, Roswell, they've been talking about, it's swamp gas, it's ball lightning, it's not what you think. It's a hoax. It's
a weather balloon.
Yeah, people out in the field using instruments and stuff to do these designs, to make the crop circles, and some kind of stupid cult doing the cattle mutilations or whatever.
Yeah.
I have a good cattle mutilation story too, by the way. But I was just shocked, because right after that, then they're like, oh, and then there's looting at Walmart, and they shift gears, and then, and it was during the height of the COVID stuff, when people were so hyper focused on everything to do with COVID, and 90% of the news was COVID this, COVID that, get your vax, for almost a year straight. So people didn't even notice when it happened. And then this other show came out with Luis Elizondo, and of course, I've since read that Luis Elizondo is most likely a CIA operative, and that he was hired to somewhat disclose. And there's different reasons that they say that they want to do this. One of the theories is that they want people to be afraid. Which for the longest time I thought, okay, War of the Worlds, and then we did these, the Bigelow report and these different things to find out where people stood with ETs. And the general consensus at that time is America isn't ready for ETs, because we would freak out. And the War of the Worlds radio program was a case in point. People were jumping out of windows, killing themselves, and freaking out. Because the way they broadcast that program, they made it look like it was an alien invasion. And very infrequently would tell you that this is a show, it's fiction. No, the way the show was programmed, they would have radio music, and then there would be this radio broadcast where they're doing this little voice acting and whatnot, and then suddenly they would interrupt it with an emergency broadcast about aliens invading New York and all of this stuff, and they did it like a news report. So people actually believed that this was going on, and there were people dying from it. And because of that, they decided people are not ready for the reality of ETs, right? So I thought all this time that the only reason they haven't really fully disclosed it and come clean yet is because they're afraid the public will panic. But then seeing what happened with COVID, I mean, they took this virus with a 0.000 what, fatality rate, and convinced people to vaccinate their kids who were not, the vaccine was more of a risk for kids than the COVID. And yet they convinced people, and they convinced our government to institute this even for kids who are not at risk. And that shows you how the lengths that they're willing to go to make a buck, right? And to have control. And the whole COVID thing too helped them to orchestrate, I don't know, personally, I believe massive voter fraud through mail-in voting, and having everybody locked in their homes and whatnot really helped to make that easier, a lot easier. So there were reasons they wanted to implement this fearful state and constantly inject panic into the public throughout that whole period, wearing a mask when they know good and well the mask didn't do anything. Even Fauci said on record, the mask doesn't do anything. It's just a feel good, it's something you tell people so they don't panic. But really, I think it's a perpetual reminder. Everywhere you go, you're surrounded by this potential of death. Somebody could cough on you, you're going to fall over dead, right? So then my whole thinking about it, like, no, it's not panic. We don't know about ETs, but it doesn't have to do with panic. They're not full disclosure about ETs because of panic. So when they finally did disclose during 2020, during the middle of the pandemic and all of this, then it was a question of, okay, do they want us to panic? And other people have spoken out and said, fear is actually in the interest of a lot of these big, like the WEF and whatnot. They use fear for government control, for people to get afraid, and then they relinquish their freedoms one by one. Yeah, I'll give up this, I'll give up that, I'll stay home, I'll submit to this vaccine passport, or whatever you want me to do, I will do it. And they want that power, because with that comes more money and more control. And I'm like kind of wondering now, maybe they release the UFO information to plant the idea that, yeah, there are things out there, and they're not necessarily in our best interest. Okay, so there's that. But however, I always have to go back to the Bible, and what's the Bible say? And truth be told, the Bible says that there are good guys out there and there's bad guys out there. And, so it's not necessarily a one-sided coin. Revelation 14, chapter 6 and 7 talks about an angel flying in the heavens preaching the gospel to the nations. So this is interesting. Does that mean an otherworldly being is going to come here to the earth in the future, associated with technology and everything, as I believe they are? Angels have chariots, and I don't think that they're this antiquated 2,000-year-old piece of technology with wheels that roll along the ground and are pulled by a horse. I think it's an intergalactic, interdimensional spacecraft. There's beings that are going to be here in the future, and they're going to be in public, open contact with humanity. I say that because Jesus said, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the days of the coming of the Son of Man. Out of all of history, he singles out the days of Noah. And that's Genesis chapter 6, when these angels were coming down and interfacing with humanity and actually reproducing with them. Society was in open contact with otherworldly beings at that time. And it led to all these giants and all this violence encompassing the whole planet. And it became so bad that God had to wipe everything out in the flood of Noah to put a stop to it, or else we would have all been wiped out, period. No survivors. There would have been nothing redeemable on this planet had God not brought the flood of Noah and saved a very small group of humans that were genetically pure, because Noah was pure in his genetics. It literally states he was pure in his generations. So his family was just about all that we had left that had not been corrupted. And then the animals that were brought aboard the ark were also genetically pure, and they saved them. Everything else got wiped out. And Jesus said, we're going to see a return to that. We're going to see all this otherworldly stuff. And what do we see these days? Well, of course, we see all these, you have people getting abducted and whatnot, but then you also see genetic manipulation, even to the point of mRNA technology and trying to get everybody messing with and used to the idea of genetic manipulation. Whether that's, I'm not going to even say whether or not that technology is good or not. I certainly won't take that, but, I'm not going to go one way or another with it. I'll just put it out that genetic modification is becoming normalized. And I think we're going to see more and more of that. I think we may also see eventually, depending on how long it takes for all this to unwind, the Bible actually predicts artificial intelligence. Revelation 13, the image of the beast, that's artificial intelligence. That is a created life form. People create this thing. They can walk, talk, think. It's put in charge of the global economy. It implements a global tracking system and a global currency that it can control to such an extent that you cannot buy or sell anything unless you buy into this thing and accept this mark. I think that that's a computer technology that, by its very definition, sounds very much like it.
Well, John, if people want to get into that, where can they get your books at? Where can they reach out to you? Where can they find them, and what's the titles?
Okay.
And then we got to wrap this up because we're running out of time.
Oh, okay, sure. My name right there, www.johnmilor.com. That's my main author website. All my books are on there. But I also have another website where I have landing pages for all of my books. Let's see if I can bring that up and I could just show it to you. aliensinthebible.com, christianufology.com. Let me share screen and I'll try to bring it up here.
And if people want to search you on Amazon, can they search for johnmilor.com?
Oh, certainly. Yeah, you could Google my name.
JOHNMILOR.com.
Yep. And then christianufology.net, thestrongdelusion.net, aliensintheantichrist.com, and aliensinthebible.com. Those are my 4 books. My email address is there on the top. Anybody who emails me asking for a free copy of my books, I will email them a free copy, and in exchange for a review on Amazon that I would appreciate.
Very
of course,
good.
I can't enforce it, but I certainly hope that they give it to me.
That's awesome, man. We want to thank you for being on tonight again, John. And for the listeners, I believe it's episode 42. This thing is coming straight at us, is John's first episode we put on our members page on our website, cryptidcreatures.net. John, thanks for being here again with us tonight here, and we'll be sure to post this out. And
all right, thank you very much for having me on again. You guys rock.
You too, brother. And anything else happens, get a hold of us, man.
Okay.
Yeah, stay in touch.
Thank you.
All right, we'll talk to you soon, brother. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.